Welcome to this lecture on cultural violence. My name is Dale Snowert, Professor of Peace Studies and Education at the University of Toledo. In this lecture, we'll explore the nature of cultural violence as a form of violence. As Yahong Gautung suggests, cultural violence refers to aspects of culture that are used to justify direct or structural violence and thereby legitimate it. Its purpose is to render violence acceptable, and it makes direct and structural violence look and feel right, or at least not wrong. It normalizes, it justifies and normalizes unjust social structures and practices, as well as institutions that perpetuate direct violence. Cultural violence has to do with the patterns of thought that underlie and justify unjust, systemic violence in terms of unjust social structures. It is aimed at power and the legitimation of certain forms of power. So, as we've discussed earlier, the basic political structure of society is a space of deliberation as well as action, and it is given shape by specific forms of reason, such that, quoting Wendy Brown, political power always materializes and is given shape by distinct rationality, a form of reason and its occlusions, a set of norms and its generative effects, end quote. The political structure of society is therefore a normative order, and it thereby a order of justification. So the power and the politics of a society are shaped by its justification narratives. That is, the beliefs, values, ideas, patterns of thought that serve to justify the given social order, whether it is just or unjust. And in many cases, the social order will be structurally violent and unjust, and there's a system of narratives, of patterns of thought that seek to justify that unjust political structure and thereby to sustain it over time. So we could think about power and the exercise of power as the capacity to influence and perhaps even to determine the reasons that justify and legitimate the narrative which organizes the political order. So power can be defined as the ability to define the values, norms, and laws that organize the political structure, the political order of the society, and thereby its social and economic order. So the core idea of cultural violence is that unjust social structures and practices are justified and sustained by often invalid justification narratives and systems of belief and patterns of thought. The perpetuation of invalid justification narratives is advanced by attacks on truth, expertise, language, and educational institutions. There are, within the space of justification narratives, within the space of reasons that are portrayed in the media, politicians, in various institutions. There are sometimes, and most recently, often, attempts to delegitimize truth, and this is expressed as hostility to reality and even the very idea of truth itself. And that has become a prominent feature of attempts to distort and undermine the space of justifications. It's often executed by dishonesty and including the perpetuation of conspiracy theories. Furthermore, there are attempts to delegitimize institutions that promote and sustain independent thought, such as universities and the press. And these attempts are pursued, and in turn they undermine the value of expertise as a source of truth and valid justification. And this attack on truth and its institutions leads to the undermining of valid moral and legal norms, the justified norms that undergird a just society. This this process seals off the space of reasons, and thereby degrading and debasing public deliberation. It turns public deliberation into sloganeering with appeals to fear and anger rather than reasoned argument. So institutions and practices of cultural violence are attempts to both perpetuate false narratives, invalid narratives that sustain and justify unjust social structures. It's also, in a more serious way, may include the attempt to undermine the very idea of truth itself and the possibility of evidence-based, logical, rational argument. This attempt and these attempts, the existence of cultural violence, leads to ideological hegemony, which is big words for the dominance of certain ideas. And the idea of ideological hegemony begins with the observation that the dominant institutions of society are controlled by a class-conscious elite. And that elite has a shared ideology, a shared belief system, a set of values, and justification narratives, which become the ruling ideas of the social order. And through various social institutions, including schools and universities, mainly schools, the ruling ideas of the elite are established as the standard explanation and justification of the social order. These ideas are portrayed as in the common interest, in the interest of all citizens. However, they tend to serve the interests of the elite. And they serve to limit discussion and debate, preventing the formation of alternative, more valid understandings of society, thus contributing to the general acceptance of the status quo. So cultural violence traffics in ideological hegemony. This can be illustrated by the idea of socially constructed differentiation. Various social constructs are created, are constructed, and narratives about those constructs are pursued and perpetuated in the population that justify viewing others who exhibit certain traits of that construct And those who exhibit those traits are perceived to be unequal in power and value, thereby excluding and oppressing them. So social constructs such as gender, race, ethnicity, and social class, ways of categorizing and differentiating groups of people in order to disempower them, to undermine their equal value so that they can be rendered powerless and excluded and oppressed. So these social constructs are used to legitimate, to justify oppression, exploitation, marginalization, powerlessness, that are the hallmarks of oppression and the hallmarks of structural violence. An example is the ideology or the social construct of white supremacy, which is a racist social construct. And this white supremacy is an ideology, is a set of ideas that perpetuate the idea of white superiority and entitlement, that individuals of European descent are somehow superior to all other groups of people in the world. And that construct, which is invalid and unjustifiable, that construct, however, is used to perpetuate unequal and unjust social structures and social practices. So white supremacy is an example of a social construct that is culturally violent, that in the sense that it justifies social structures of inequality that are unjust. Another example is information warfare, another example of cultural violence that has gotten much press in recent years, rather. Here's a statement by General Valery Gersimov, the chief of the General Staff of the Russian Armed Forces. This General Gersimov is the highest-ranking military officer in Russia, equivalent to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the United States. And he wrote, he made the following statement, and I'm quoting: "Of great importance here is the use of the global internet network to exert a massive, dedicated impact on the consciousness of the citizens of states that are targets of the aggression. Information resources have become one of the most effective types of weapon. Their extensive employment enables the situation in a country to be destabilized from within in a matter of days. In this manner, indirect and asymmetric actions and methods of conducting hybrid wars enable the opposing side to be deprived of its actual sovereignty without the state's territory being seized." Gersimov is arguing here that countries can be destabilized and their sovereignty can be undermined. They can be defeated, in a sense, through the employment of information warfare that is directed at the consciousness of the citizens of those states. That information, in particular disinformation, is a powerful weapon that can destabilize but it also can justify certain other social structures. And this information warfare can be seen within the context of the global struggle between democracy and autocracy, which is currently occurring in the world. Autocracy, authoritarianism, has emerged strongly in the world in the last 10 years, but in particular in the last 4 years, from Turkey to Hungary to the Philippines. One could even perhaps argue that the United States democratic system is also under attack as well, both from the inside and the outside. So information warfare is, as a form of cultural violence, is being used around the world to undermine democracy and to establish authoritarian systems of government. The goal of information warfare is arbitrary rule or domination. It's an attempt to shape the will of the opponent, of the target population, to shape the justifying reasons of the society in favor of certain interests by delegitimizing the valid justifying reasons of the enemy and portraying invalid reasons as valid in order to achieve political domination. There are two basic grounds of political consensus. One is conformity, the other is mutual agreement based in valid reasons. Democracy requires valid reasons achieved through the exercise of public reason and deliberation. Autocratic power pursues conformity. It pursues obedience by the population, so the population conforms and does not question the validity of the reasons given by the government or its policies. In order to achieve this autocratic power, a conformity to valid justification must be discredited and delegitimated. The space of public deliberation and reason must be undermined in order for autocratic power to be successful. The strategic aims of information warfare include undermining democratic norms, moral, political, and legal, the destabilization and delegitimization of established democratic norms and values. A particular dimension of information warfare as cultural violence is to polarize, to heightened polarization around identity, ethnic identity and political identity, to achieve tribalization within the society. And that undermines the possibility of reasonable discourse among citizens, including the possibility of disagreement and reasonable disagreement and compromise. And this tends to result in political opponents being perceived as enemies. So a part of the strategic aim of cultural violence in the form of information warfare is to tribalize the population, to alienate and polarize, to divide the population. And also, as we've already discussed, to undermine the idea of truth, the idea of rational inquiry, evidence, and standards of validity. This has been expressed with the phrase post-truth. And all of this degrades, distorts, and debases public deliberation. It undermines the possibility of any kind of reasonable discourse and reasonable agreement politically. Tactical measures include spin, fake news, alternative facts, propaganda, memes, bots are frequently used to spread disinformation, all aimed at triggering fear, desire, seduction, conformity, identity, etc. It focuses on various psychological dimensions in order to divide and to discredit certain groups of people. This is an example of a piece of propaganda engineered by the Russian Cyber Information Warfare Unit, the IRA, during the 2015-16 presidential campaign. They generated this poster, and it was circulated all around the country through social media outlets, among others. And here, on the left is the poster: "Miners for Trump, bring back our jobs." How many PA workers lost their jobs due to Obama's destructive policies? It asks. Help Mr. Trump fix it. This was a poster, an ad run, generated in Russia and circulated in the United States by Russian bots and other operatives in order to promote the candidacy of Donald Trump, candidate Trump at the time. The man pictured, the coal miner pictured in the poster, is not an American, not a coal miner. He was the father of one of the Russian officers who's pictured on the right. They cropped his photograph and into the poster and portrayed the image of him as a West Virginia coal miner. So this is an example of political propaganda generated outside of the country in order to influence the outcome of an internal election, a meddling in the election of the United States, which is really an act of war, in this case an act of information warfare. Another example, this is from Great Britain. This was an ad supporting the Brexit movement to leave the European Union. There was a referendum, as you remember, there's a referendum taken in Great Britain, in the United Kingdom, to choose to leave the European Union, and this ad was circulated in promotion of the Leave movement. And here we have Syrian refugees pictured, and the idea is that we must break free of the EU and take back control of our borders. If we don't leave the EU, the ad is saying we will be overrun by these refugees. Not factual, no evidence for that, a piece of propaganda. The countermeasure to cultural violence is a critically educated citizenry with the capacity to construct valid normative justifications in political discourse and to engage in the critique and critical scrutiny of propaganda. It entails asserting counter narratives of valid justification. It involves critical analysis of existing invalid ideologies and misinformation, and the development of the capacity to engage in critical analysis and valid justification. From our perspective, the response to information warfare and to cultural violence in general is to make America think again. That is to produce a critically educated and aware citizenry. Thank you.